It's time again for another great match between Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen, as these two players absolutely hate each other. As their history goes back to September 22, we all remember that famous game Magnus Carlsen lost against Hans Niemann, and after that he withdrew from the tournament. He felt that something was very suspicious. Even a few weeks later, in an online game, he voluntarily resigned on move 2 just to make a statement that he is playing against a cheater. And, interestingly, we all know what happened. I mean, Hans filed a complaint, $100 million court case. Eventually, these two players settled and agreed that they are going to meet again in online chess, or even over-the-board chess, of course. And now, in Title Tuesday, they play again. It's the final round of Title Tuesday, played on the 9th of July. And Hans Niemann is playing with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen. And it's an absolutely incredible game. You will enjoy the action on the board. I will show you the highlights of this game. Just make sure to subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like, or even help the channel to grow with some nice little donation via my PayPal account. Thanks for all the support, guys. Here we go. Hans Niemann plays 1e4, and Magnus goes for the move e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian opening, knight f6, d3, protecting the pawn and avoid any sharp lines based on knight g5. Magnus goes for the setup with h6, covering the g5 square. c3, d6, and now white goes for the move a4. Interestingly, this was all played before by Hans in a game I covered on the channel as well. It was back in December 2023, the London Chess Classic. Hans played with the white pieces against Mateusz Bartel, Grandmaster from Poland, and it's one of the most insane games I've ever covered on the channel, so make sure to check out that video as well. In that game, g6 was played with the idea to go bishop g7, but Magnus puts the bishop on e7. Now, white continues with the move a5, grabbing space on the queen side, and that pawn is just going to be ignored. Castled king side, and now a6. White is trying to open up the file for the rook, trying to create some weaknesses on that part of the board, but Magnus keeps the queen side closed. With the move b6, white castled, and here the bishop comes out to e6. And interestingly, we have been this battle between bishops. We have covered it before on the channel, even in the previous video. After bishop takes e6, f takes e6. On one hand, white is giving up control in the center, doubled pawns, half open f-file for black. But this pawn on e6 can also become a weakness later on. It's difficult to say who is actually better here. Engines like white a bit. I think practically black's position is also very pleasant to play. Knight bd2 played. White continues developing. Queen d7. So here the rooks are connected. Rook e1. And here Magnus played a little strange move, as he played the move rook a8. In a way, very logical, just to centralize the rook, but after the move knight f1, the knight is coming over to the king side, he played the move rook f7. So anyway, he intends to double rooks on the f-file. After the move h3, rook df8, black is ready to cause some threats on the king side. And then you may think, okay, why did black play first the move rook d8? To me, it seems a little strange. Maybe there's some hidden idea. Maybe with the rook on d8, there were ideas to try to break in the center with d5. But usually, when playing with such a structure, you don't want to do anything with that. You just want to play on the king side with these rooks. And, well, we will see how that works out in practice. Knight g3 was played by Hans. And, well, at some point, white will try to break in the center with the move d4. But what should black do now? I mean, the pawn on a6 can also become a liability. And, well, Magnus played here the move queen c8. Frankly speaking, I'm not a big fan of this move. He is really trying to win that pawn by going back with a knight, or even the other knight will come over via f6 to d7 and then to c5. It's an interesting idea, but it feels, to me at least, it feels like you're playing on the wrong side of the board. There were also ideas For instance, to go knight h7 to open up the file, maybe go knight g5, trying to create some action there. But queen c8 played, bishop e3, knight d7 played. And here, Hans Niemann played the move d4. He is trying to gain control in the center, occupying the center with pawns on d4 and e4, pawn takes d4, white recaptures, and now the c-file is open. So who knows, maybe white is able to put some pressure against the knight on c6, which is unprotected. But here, knight db8 is played. So Magnus Carlsen is playing in a very materialistic way. He wants to take on a6 and then say, okay, I'm just a pawn up. I'm very, very rock solid. There's nothing you can do. But this is in fact a very important moment in the game, as by voluntarily dropping back with your knights, you're giving white a chance to seize the initiative in the center. But it was not done by Hans Niemann. He played here the move queen e2. He just wanted to play the move queen e2 to protect the pawn. I just show you one insane line. This is computer stuff and impossible to find in over-the-board play. But the best move is to go d5. If you take, white recaptures, you hit a knight again. If you go knight e5, the knight comes into d4 with plans of install itself on e6. This is a very, very good piece. If instead of going to e5, you put a knight on b4, when knight e4 can be met by knight takes d5, well, in that sense, you, instead of knight e4, you better play something like queen d2 to attack the knight. And if you take on a6 so that the knights are coordinated again, there's this absolutely insane, stunning piece sacrifice to sack on h6. And after that, white develops a tremendous initiative as all the pieces are concentrated on the king side. Black's king is wide open, and the fact that you're a piece down doesn't matter because the knights are totally misplaced on the wrong side of the board. But you understand, this is impossible to find just being low on time. And even here, it is not super clear, but it's very, very dangerous for black. Anyway, let's get back to the game. Queen e2 was played. Knight b4. Knight is quite stable on this square. Cannot be attacked by any of white's pawns. These pawns are gone. And you're ready to pick up the pawn on a6. Rook ec1. So the rook is putting pressure here on the c-file. And rather than taking the pawn on a6, black strikes back in the center with the move c5. That pawn on a6 will not walk away, cannot be supported that well. And well, if you get a chance to take next, then once again, black is just a healthy pawn up in that case. But first things first, Hans Niemann played the move e5, trying to steer things up in the center. But black responds very well with the move d5, ready to go c4. And then create a majority. Maybe b5 can be played. The knight can come to d3. So pawn takes c5 was played. But this is also not looking great for white because these pawns are excellent. They are taking away a lot of squares from white's minor pieces. And here Hans continues with knight d4. He's trying to exploit the skewer on the c-file. Of course, the knight on d4 can't be taken as it hangs the queen on c8. But the queen goes to d7, getting out of the pin, threatening to take the knight, keeping the pawn on e6 defended, so white cannot really take there. Knight c2 played, offering the exchange of knights, but rather than doing anything with his knight, d4. That is the key move, hitting the bishop. If bishop goes away, the pawn comes forward to d3 with a double attack, winning huge material. So that is not possible. And also, taking first on b4 is not very attractive either, because you're taking the bishop on e3. The knight on b4 is still hanging. After the knight goes away, you're ready to take on f2. And white's position is falling apart. So, instead, rook d1 is played. So that you're pinning a central pawn once again. D pawn cannot take on e3 as it hangs the queen. But therefore, knight d5 is played, moving the knight away. Fantastic square for the knight, controlling the center. Bishop on e3 is hanging now. Bishop goes back. And it looks like white may still have everything under control. But the next move is super strong. Rook takes f2. As black captures the pawn and is ready to play position with queen versus two rooks. Which Hans Niemann didn't allow. He didn't capture on f2. Because in that case, your king is very vulnerable. And also the minor pieces are not great. Especially a move like bishop h4 to pin the knight on g3, with ideas to go for a move like queen f7 to win the knight on g3. But in any case, you're super active with all your forces. This is really bad. I mean, it's clear that the black queen will become stronger than these rooks. There are no any useful open files to occupy with the white rooks. So instead of taking on f2, queen g4 was played. So black is a pawn up, but white is looking for counterplay. Bishop takes h6 with threats against the black king, threatening mate. It's very serious. So king h8 played. Knight h5, threatening checkmate on g7. But the bishop goes back to d8. Excellent defense, as it opens up the 7th rank for the queen, defending the g7 pawn. And white played here b4. He really wants to get rid of these very, very annoying pawns on c5 and d4. So imagine that these pawns are gone. It looks quite playable. But now Magnus plays excellently. He goes for knight c6, so he allows the capture on c5. He now is able to take on e5 himself, threatening the queen. And, well, the queen can take on d4. This was basically Hans Niemann, his plan. And you may think everything is pretty okay. There are no immediate threats against the white king. But the bishop comes to c7, protecting the knight. Very important, of course, that you don't give up that piece too easily. And black is in really good shape. I mean, it's very hard to contest these rooks on the f-file. For instance, if you now take on f2, you're losing your knight on h5 immediately. So that's not an option. And basically the same happens if you play rook f1. The rooks are coming off the board, and you're able to go queen f7 once again. And the attempt to save the knight is just met by g5 with an attack on the pinned knight. So that's also not going to work. So what should white do? Difficult to say. Queen e4 was played. So overprotecting the pawn on g2. And looks like, once again, everything is under control. But now Magnus understands that in such sharp positions, it's a battle for the initiative. Queen f7 played, hitting the knight on h5. The knight goes back to g3. And once again, if you do get a chance, maybe rook f1 can be played and white will consolidate. But the next move is fantastic, guys. It's knight f3 check with a huge knight fork. So this piece cannot be ignored. I mean, for instance, if you take on f2, there is knight takes d2 with a discovered check, and you're winning the queen. So that is game over. You got to take the knight. And now you may even consider simply capturing the knight on g3. But here, both players were down to about 10 seconds each. And Magnus is not interested in grabbing material. He is playing for a mating attack. He only wants to get his major pieces closer to the white king. The knight is hanging anyway, so the knight goes back to e2, and now it's queen h5. This is something you're not able to calculate with 10 seconds on the clock. But you understand that if you can take on h3 and then deliver checkmate, it's very difficult for white to defend here. For instance, if you play queen takes e6, was not played, but you're defending the pawn on h3, queen h4, with the idea to go queen f2 and threatening mate on h2. Now after rook f1, there is rook g3, and it's just a crushing attack. If you take that rook, queen takes g3, king h1, queen h2. That's what happens when these pieces are able to come into your position. This bishop on c7 helping from afar. But anyway, this line is just an example, but you see that white is missing pawns defending his king, and it's worth a piece because white's pieces are far away from the action. Queen g4 played. Of course, white would be relieved to get in this exchange of queens, but queen e5 on the board, renewing a mating threat on h2. Excellent move. And there's only one move here for white, which was not played. Queen g2 should be considered to cover the mating threat. I like something like rook f6 with the idea to go to g6 and try to deflect the queen from covering the h2 square. I mean, white's position is absolutely unbearable. Was not played. Queen g2, knight f4 on the board. But now you can simply take with your knight and you're regaining material. For instance, if you take on f4, it's just rook takes f4, and all black's pieces are fantastically placed. So this is just game over. Instead of taking on f4, white played here the move queen takes f3, capturing the rook. But it's knight e2 check, discover check on the queen. So you're gonna lose huge material. If you go queen f2, for instance, you're not gonna take on f3. You just play queen g3, and the queen can't be taken because of the pin. If you take on e2, it's queen takes f3, and after king e1, it is checkmate on f2. That's very convincing. Instead, king g2 played, but there is queen h2 with check. And now it's king f1, the rook takes f3. Players were down 2 seconds, but never really any danger to lose on time, of course, with this 1 second increment after king e1. It is queen f2 with checkmate. Magnus Carlsen shows that he is still the best player on earth by defeating his main rival. I mean, Hans is not, of course, the main rival in a sense that he's a danger to his world's #1 spot. But there is huge tension between these two guys. So both players were playing at their best. But Magnus showed still his skills in this blitz game. So for this was very impressive blitz game. Brilliant attack. Let me know in the comments, what do you think of this game? Thanks for tuning in. And very soon, many more interesting games, of course, of Magnus Carlsen and also Hans Niemann. So stay tuned. Bye bye.